Hello, you wonderful soul. Today's topic is toxic relationships from a shamanic perspective. And I have also divided this topic, on one hand, into the normal relationships that we have with our surroundings. This includes family, friends, and company, and so on. And then, of course, also in partnerships, how this can manifest. And then we naturally address the effects of a toxic relationship. Where does it start and where does it end? And on the other hand, of course, what are the actual causes that we are in a toxic relationship and sometimes remain in a toxic relationship? My name is Riedel. I have been following the shamanic path for 20 years, and I am initiated in the tradition of the Incas and the tradition of the Blackfoot. And once you comprehend the underlying and complex mechanisms behind a toxic relationship, only then you will be able to slowly and gradually free yourself completely from it. And it starts here very subtly, very lightly. And it can escalate more and more to the point where you have the classic image of a narcissist in mind who totally oppresses, controls, and dominates you. And then at some point, you completely and utterly lose the sense of yourself. You no longer really know who you truly are, have no contact with the outside world, and are just a shadow of your former self. And that is, of course, the extreme example of how a toxic relationship can affect someone. And then you also have really massive problems finding yourself again afterwards. To rise up again from the deep hole where you might find yourself and regain your confidence and emotional stability, to reach the state you were in before the toxic relationship so that you can function normally in your daily life again. And I would essentially characterize it in detail as getting your energy level back to about 0 like it was before. No longer at minus 100 like it was in a toxic relationship anymore at all. And this extreme example can occur not only in a partnership, it can also occur in a family system or even in a professional company system. That's why you can't always say that only narcissists, who are people with an excessive interest in or admiration of themselves, are automatically toxic, meaning harmful or unpleasant. It can also be that you are in a normal environment, which is a typical or usual setting, and have certain people around you or in your family who simply aren't good for you and always try to belittle you, which means to make you feel less important or constantly question you, making you feel like you, as you are not okay. That the way you currently think, feel, and act is not acceptable in any manner whatsoever. You must conform, because after all, you are not quite normal. And on one side, there is the active part, who actively engages in a toxic relationship and tries to push your buttons so that you don't feel good about yourself as you are, but rather feel smaller than you truly are. Simply put, yes. And then there is also the passive part on the other side, in essence. This means that unfortunately there are people who allow exactly that to happen to them. So don't let it happen to you from the start. It always goes step by step by step. It's a slow creeping process, definitely gradually. And I want to give you an image to think about. Imagine a frog sitting in a pot of water, and this water is being heated more and more, little by little, very slowly. At first, the frog doesn't even notice it. It just gets a little warmer, and a little warmer, day by day. And he keeps adapting continuously until it reaches a point where the water is so hot that he uses so much energy to adapt that he is no longer able to leave the water no matter how hard he tries, even though he tries his best. And at some point in time, the frog might simply and inevitably die because it no longer has the necessary strength to leave this inhospitable environment. And it's not like this frog automatically jumps into boiling hot water. And it's indeed the same in a very toxic relationship, that the toxic relationship, just like in this image, starts off harmoniously. And then in a toxic relationship, there is naturally a perpetrator who inherently and essentially turns up the dials, and a victim who keeps adjusting and readjusting and repeatedly readjusting. And now it's about recognizing which side you are on. Because sometimes in a toxic relationship, a dynamic develops that escalates more and more, becoming increasingly poisonous, even though it might have seemed normal or even harmonious at the beginning. And that can be with friends, it can definitely be in a family, it can absolutely also be in a company, or even in a partnership. And this mechanism is essentially basically the same everywhere. There is always an I, basically. That means how you treat yourself in any way, how you perceive yourself, how you love yourself or don't love yourself at all, and how comfortable you feel within yourself. And that is one energy, the I energy. Then there is the other energy, which is the we. And in every type of relationship, there is a we. And at some point, it may be that the we is placed above everything else. And fundamentally, the crucial question is always, if you pull back yourself to the point where it no longer feels good for you, where you question yourself so much that it simply doesn't feel good anymore, and you give too much into the we and more or less sacrifice yourself, losing yourself piece by piece more and more, then the whole thing becomes toxic. Yes, and this beginning is very gradual at first. You might say, well, okay, I'll work some extra hours. That's completely fine in a professional partnership with friends. Well, okay, I'll help you, even if I'm at my wit's end. But after all, you need my help or you need a listening ear and so on. Or even in the family, that you take on your specific role here, that you give too much for your parents, for your children, depending on exactly what situation or constellation you are in your family life, to the point where it no longer does you any good. And it's not about giving too much from the beginning. The longer you stay in this relationship, the more demanding and challenging these relationships can become, the more consuming they can be, to the point where it eventually costs you so much of your precious energy on one side that you simply have too little left for yourself. And on the other side, your self-esteem is so severely and deeply shaken because you might be convinced that your own personal ideas, your core and fundamental values, what is truly and deeply important to you, what you want to live by in your life, are not okay or acceptable, and that you should conform to this we mentality because everyone else might be worried about you being the way you naturally are. So you are constantly made to feel guilty, to the point where you might even start agreeing with it eventually. Because it's not like you hear this sentence once, you are not okay the way you are. It's similar to the saying, constant dripping wears away the stone. Meaning that if you keep giving more and more energy, having 1% less energy for yourself each day, and because it's a constant situation in a toxic environment, eventually you will have no strength left and will simply completely collapse. Then it can happen that you gradually become more and more insecure and might even agree with things you wouldn't normally agree with, because the majority or the constant bombardment in such a relationship is ultimately perceived by you as the truth over time. Really, it's a difficult and draining situation. Yes, and this saying comes to mind. The more often a lie is told to you, the more you believe it to be the truth. This is also true in psychology, and a warning sign can be that in every toxic relationship, it is not about you. It is always about the other person or about the we. Or in a larger group, it is also about that group. For the benefit of this larger group, or for the benefit of the other, or for the benefit of this sense of we. And that always wants to pull you away from yourself. And that is the mechanism that, yes, for the good of the community, for the good of the partnership, or for the good of the family, this sacrifice must be made. And even though you are already completely empty inside, you still go far beyond your limits. And this is not just a theory I'm talking about here. I know this from my own childhood and have experienced several toxic relationships myself. Yes, and that happens without us noticing it at first. And of course, I will go into more detail later on why we don't notice it and what mechanism is underlying it. To better understand this mechanism, I am taking extra time today to really dive deeper into it, really. And it goes so deep that even the active part and the passive part indeed actually participate actively in these mechanisms without really knowing what lies beneath, why they behave the way they do, truly, in fact. And now we are really truly diving much deeper into the subject. And this mechanism is precisely that we seek recognition, love, and a sense of belonging from the outside world that sees us as we are. That we have the feeling of being secure, that we are recognized as such, and that we are perceived at our core as we truly are, allowing us to show our true selves. This is the longing that everyone yearns deeply and profoundly for. And we naturally seek the same in a partnership, to be truly and deeply seen in our depth, recognized in our soul, and simply accepted as we truly and profoundly are. Maybe you also know these necklaces, right? A heart where two halves make a whole. And indeed, many people actually often possess the perception that they are looking for the other half that makes them whole. Exactly, that's our problem at the beginning of our journey, that we don't feel complete within ourselves and often look outward in our lives to find the other half to feel whole and complete. Yes, and then when we have supposedly found our other half, it can create this feeling for both of us in the first moment that we have found each other, that together we create a strong we that we have never felt before. Then it may be that self-awareness has been so very, very unconsciously withdrawn at this particular moment. Indeed, that the we comes first, indeed. And this happens imperceptibly at first, that we do everything possible for the relationship so that this state of happiness continues, and bit by bit, without noticing it at first, we hold ourselves back so much that we forget ourselves. And that's why I can give the advice here. Listen to yourself, stay with yourself, pay attention to your self-awareness so that you don't lose yourself in the we. And the challenge is, if you haven't found your true core self, if you still have this feeling inside you of not being completely genuine, or if you don't have the feeling that you've found yourself, that you are at peace within yourself, then this longing arises to lose yourself a bit in the other person. Because this wonderful feeling of happiness that arises at the beginning, you want to maintain that permanently. That's the mechanism that is deeply ingrained within you. During this phase, you naturally and instinctively want to show your best side and genuinely try to please the other person, whether it's in the company, in the partnership, or in the friendship. Unconsciously and without realizing it, we put the other person first and foremost and then gradually take a step back more and more, little by little. And then at some point, it also initiates the second phase where we are reminded that this is not me anymore. This is not me. And during this second phase, there are also two different parts, two components, where you start to question the whole thing yourself, meaning you question the we. And then there is the passive part where you are being questioned, where you also notice, oh, this is different from how it was at the beginning. And these active and passive components can always, in a manner of speaking, move back and forth. That means sometimes one person is the active part and sometimes the other person is the passive part, depending on the underlying issue in nature. Because the unresolved issues are actually indeed the real cause of our truly toxic behavior, definitely. And I will go into more detail on that later because that is ultimately the key. So it may be depending on the underlying issue that hasn't been resolved and the other person is demonstrating. This specifically means that one person is already further along and is essentially demonstrating what the other has not yet integrated. For example, one person might say, I am truly an expert at making a lot of money, being indeed successful, and they demonstrate to you that it is really very easy, or even that it is very easy to make friends and be totally popular. And that's basically what you don't have in this case. So there's the active part where someone sets an example, and then there's the passive part where you say, hey, yeah, I can't do that now. That's a shame. That's weird. I don't feel so good about it. So in that case, you have deficits in this area. And then exactly these issues arise, which are then projected onto you. And that is the active part. Then you are unconsciously tempted due to emotions, envy, jealousy, or perhaps even ill will to belittle yourself, to think that it is not okay to be the way you are. That it's really ridiculous that you're actually so extremely popular with friends that it would be better for the sense of we if you held back more and put your partner first, in fact. Or that it is not healthy to have so many friends and actually constantly live outwardly, in fact. And then there are the flimsiest justifications and explanations to support the irrational and unfounded feeling that gets triggered by the perception or belief that someone, intentionally or unintentionally, is trying to make you feel smaller and less significant. And that's precisely because there is absolutely no willingness to look deeply inward and see what underlying issue is present. And now let's delve deeper into this passive part. That means if you notice that someone is more successful or more popular or in other areas, maybe they paint better, dance better, or whatever it is, they are better in a certain area and you feel like you are worth less. You then indeed leave from without any doubt, depart from playing field to her or him, actually feeling smaller than ever before. And then it can be unconscious that manipulation is taking place in any given situation, whenever he or she, for example, or perhaps goes to friends or goes to sports because he is particularly athletic, or whatever activity is being demonstrated that you don't have, that it makes you feel bad, that you then say, spend more time with me. Oh, it makes me sad when you always go there, and so on. It definitely makes me feel absolutely terrible. And then it can indeed happen that exactly this mechanism is active without you consciously perceiving what exactly issue lies beneath. Therefore, the foundation for leading a fundamentally healthy relationship and not ending up in a toxic one is that everyone can speak completely and honestly, openly about their emotions, not holding back out of common politeness, fear, or a false sense of unity. You need to truly show yourself as you are, express what it really does to you, and then also be willing to talk about it, to speak completely openly and authentically without activating these mechanisms. Of course, this indeed requires a certain kind of self-reflection, that you are willing to reflect on yourself and what ultimately and truly lies deeply beneath. And in a healthy partnership, it is completely and utterly normal for there to be strengths and weaknesses on each and every side. For one person to sometimes, albeit rarely, get jealous or triggered. And then you need the courage and the determination and the willingness to openly discuss it and perhaps even resolve it afterwards. Because it might be that a completely different issue is lying underneath, which has little or nothing to do with the actual current situation, but is actually being activated within you at this very moment in time. So that no wrong impression arises here, that you don't have to be a therapist in a relationship, meaning you don't have to lead a coaching relationship where one person is constantly being coached or vice versa, where you are always being coached. Instead, you should feel that in a healthy partnership, you are both on equal footing, and that is a healthy partnership that can also withstand challenges. Life is organic, and we have various skills that we need to acquire and develop. And with that, we are also confronted with setbacks. We are also confronted with relationship issues and challenges and problems and difficulties that can more and more frequently pop up over time, the longer you live together, and then constantly having the willingness to question oneself in a thoughtful manner, both of you questioning yourselves with a deep sense of introspection, the emotions triggered by various external circumstances, and truly facing them and understanding the underlying causes and trying to deal with them constructively and addressing them with a positive mindset. Yes, over time, everyday life shows how you deal with things, how you treat yourself, and how you do things, how you act outwardly. And these differences, whether they are in a partnership or in everyday professional life, can trigger certain issues in different ways and various situations. That means that over time, it can somehow trigger you, following the saying, constant dripping wears away the stone. If one, for example, one is tidy and the other is messy, or when one places more value on career and success and the other places more value on relationship and partnership, and that this then also permanently leads to friction is also completely normal. And then it can also happen that the whole thing inevitably becomes toxic at some point in time because we ultimately end up wearing ourselves out on it forever. And the longer we wear ourselves out in a relationship, the more toxic it ultimately becomes in the long run. But what if someone is not willing to reflect on themselves eventually? What if someone always feels that they are absolutely right and everyone else is making mistakes and doing everything completely wrong? This is the classic narcissist as we know them. That means they do everything right and everyone else is wrong. And you don't notice it at the beginning because at the very beginning, indeed, the feeling of we and this wonderful feeling is created. And in the beginning, a tremendous amount of effort is put into maintaining this mask or facade, being the good one, constantly holding oneself back. This happens consciously and deliberately on one side, but also unconsciously and automatically on the other side. And then it's about the narcissist, the classic narcissist, who is always wanting to have this relationship, whether it's a woman or a man, always wanting to have the relationship without ever realizing that this hole in their heart or this deep feeling of being small, of being less worthy, that they also deeply feel within themselves, is then projected onto others. Yes, and this classic narcissist does everything to get this relationship. That means in the beginning, he also tends to put others on a pedestal and, of course, gives a lot of gifts. And then it can happen that the passive part in this case also feels, wow, this is great. This is amazing. How did I deserve this? This is amazing. This is just the beginning. And then the topic keeps coming up again and again, just like in a normal relationship. And then at some point, the masks fall off. And because this willingness to self-reflect is not there, he has his own strategies to carefully manipulate his partner and make subtle and often hurtful statements that make one feel smaller and insignificant, that make one feel not right or inadequate. Furthermore, at the very beginning, it is barely noticeable, very delicate, very light, very subtle, and almost invisible. And then it gradually increases from time to time, like with this image of the frog sitting in the water. The dial is turned up more and more, and you get less and less of a feeling for yourself and slowly withdraw so much that you start to believe that it is good to live in it, that it is good because the other person also has these deficits. Yes, and then it can happen that a narcissist convinces you of their deficits, of their issues, and in fact actually uses that to justify their behavior. Indeed. For example, his behavior, that he couldn't help it, that he had to cheat on you because he has this issue. Indeed, actually. Yes. Or he might do other things and maybe even become aggressive. Yes, that's because he has this pain underneath and perhaps can't help it. And that is exactly the projection that takes place, that you, as the passive part in such a relationship, always only see the potential, see the core essence, and can also feel that he is actually a generous person at his true core, a kind person. But he can't act differently because he has his patterns and therefore can only act the way he does. But at this very point, I would like to take a very short break because thousands, many, especially many women, often see the potential in many men, but not the current state, how it actually is in the present moment. Instead, the narcissists justify their behavior, their really bad behavior. And as a result, you get sucked into the narcissist's universe in an incredibly overwhelming and all-consuming manner, unable to keep your own universe stable within yourself. This can lead to completely losing yourself. So here again, the focus is on how he is acting now. Not recognizing the potential, but how is the relationship now and how is it behaving now? Because it goes even further as he then exercises more and more control until it eventually escalates to absolute control. It starts slowly at first, gradually. Who was that? Where are you going now? And so on. That your rights, your self-awareness, your ability to live as yourself are increasingly restricted, and it keeps escalating. And I don't want to go too deep into it now, until you eventually feel completely drained, completely lost. And everyone has their own personal threshold for pain. And I always say it also takes emotional maturity to ultimately say stop, indeed. I'm making a cut right here at this moment. I'm leaving this relationship behind. I'm venturing into an unknown land. Yes, of course, such relationships also last longer. And you might find yourself at a point where you ask yourself, why did I let it get this far? And maybe, perhaps indeed, you also feel embarrassed that you don't have anyone outside who can help you. Because the strategy is that you are belittled at first subtly, then increasingly more severely. And then your contacts with your friends, your acquaintances, and even your family keep decreasing because, after all, you have to live in the we, and the relationship is ultimately the most important thing. And because you are indeed truly isolated, you can no longer have a normal reflection or even an outside perspective on your relationship. You feel even more lost. And as a result, it may be much harder for you to get out of it at all because you are trapped in this isolation, in this specific downward spiral of isolation. In fact, indeed, actually, I would definitely like to give you a tip. If you are really in such a circumstance, try to absolutely reconnect with your companions, even if you haven't reached out to them in a long time. Even when you are indeed with your family, seek contact with the family members who can truly help you, with whom you had a truly good relationship before, so that you know you have support and understanding. Remember that you don't have to walk the path completely alone. Indeed, if you really want to get out of it, if you truly and completely walk the path out of it entirely alone, it's ultimately about developing a sense of yourself, a sense of I. then you can also definitely decide whether you want to maintain such a relationship permanently or not. If you have no contact with friends or family members, then I recommend that you perhaps also seek professional help from outside, such as a counselor. Because there are also indeed specialists who have specialized in helping women or men get out of such very, very extremely difficult relationships. Because the important thing is that you have someone with whom you can talk about everything and who will help you when things get tough. And now I would like to ask you a question. What exactly is love for you? What really is the definition of love for you, to you? This term is taught to us in our childhood, explaining what love is allowed to mean for us. And when we are indeed a good boy or truly a good girl, we actually do it for the family, for the mother, for the father. Then you are certainly a beloved child or undoubtedly a loved child. We are often taught that love is in fact conditional. If we do that, then we are good. If we do that, then we are loved. If we do that, we are recognized. And if we no longer do what is expected of us, then we are no longer recognized. Then we no longer receive love in any way, at all, whatsoever. Then we might even be potentially punished. Then we might even be severely labeled as bad people by society. And all we want is to belong to our community of people. We want to have love, recognition, and acceptance, and a sense of belonging. And that's why we unconsciously behave in a way that we also receive this love, because we act this way as it is tied to this condition in order to indeed receive this love. Yes, and then it may be that in our childhood, in our early years, we longed for this love, for this attention, and did things where we believed we would receive this love, affection, admiration, and recognition, but perhaps we did not receive them after all. And that's exactly what I observe in many clients who come to talk to me for advice. Then this hole in the heart arises, this deep hole from a lack of love, a lack of recognition, and this overwhelming feeling of not being good enough. And then this drive comes into existence, in fact, the need to do something in order to be good enough at all, to prove that we are even lovable here, to demonstrate that we are rightfully and justly allowed to receive the recognition we desire, not because we are the way we are, but because we achieve what we achieve in our own unique way. So we define what we do and accomplish. When we do good for the relationship, then we are loved. Yes. And that is how we feel. This all happens unconsciously. Yes, and it can also be that we were indeed exposed to manipulations and aggressions in our childhood, sometimes, that we have also continued to absorb into our system. And all of this, of course, unconsciously. And we, in some sense, unconsciously reconstruct in our later life exactly the home that we experienced in our childhood, in some sense. Because in our home, we were always safe, and we were carefully taught how the world really works. And if we behave exactly like that, then we will indeed survive. And that is ultimately the mechanism. Then the very programs that we were indeed taught in childhood are actually active. All of this, of course, on an unconscious level, in fact. And this can potentially lead to us being either actively in the active part of a toxic relationship, or passively in the passive part of a toxic relationship, which can be very harmful. And here I would like to bring up another example. That is, if you are in a workplace where you are being bullied, it may be that you experienced exactly the same scenarios in your childhood, that you might have been bullied in school or in other situations as well. And now in adult life, the whole thing repeats itself over and over again, just with different actors repeatedly. And exactly this pattern or program that you have been programmed with remains essentially, indeed, in fact, likely active. And I also understand that you naturally wish for example, a partnership on equal footing or a wonderful workplace. But in reality, you actually attract completely different people because these issues are not yet resolved. Yes, and if you now want to permanently change your resonance, meaning that you no longer attract a workplace where you are bullied or a partnership where the other person is a narcissist, in this extreme example, then you should start transforming everything from within. If you now realize that you might be at a point where you want to work more intensively on these topics and you need professional help, then I can highly recommend my Shamanic Self-Healing course. In this course, you will learn exactly how to deal with your feelings and heavy blockages, gradually dissolve them, and continuously elevate your energy. you will be supplied with fresh, revitalizing life energy, allowing you to become more in tune with yourself. In the second step, you will recognize what you truly want in life and what you don't want, which is not always clear for many people. Then you can gradually realign your life. So if you really want to seriously change your life, then just click the link up here and I'll be absolutely, definitely happy if the course helps you change your life too. Yes, those were definitely my thoughts on this topic. And if you like this video, feel free to share it with others or pass it along. And if you want more insights or a glimpse into my daily routines, just follow me on Instagram. The link is below in the description. See you next time. Bye. Ciao.